Brian Oliver presents Haunting Tales of Madness.
The Pollution Engine, written by Brian Oliver, narrated by Daniel Oliver. Global warming was absolutely set to bring the downfall of humanity. That is, until my lab partner Katie Newton and I developed a solution. My name is Dr. Gregory Sharp, and I am the inventor of the Pollution Engine. Our project began in the 1990s, and decades later, its time had finally come. Katie and I worked for Century Corp International in the Exploratory Science Division. Katie had dark red hair, light freckles, and glasses too big for her face. She was sharp as a tack and full of life and energy, the kind of coworker that makes you glad to go to the office every day. Her studies had primarily been in the realm of nanotechnology and quantum theory. I remember on one occasion, we were eating lunch together and viewing a news report about rising waters in Louisiana. Melting ice caps meant bad news for millions. That was when Katie told me her big idea. She pulled out her notebook and presented me with a sketch. "Greg, this is what I am calling the Pollution Engine. If this can work, I think it might be the only saving grace the world has left. Think about it." I am thinking about it. But these designs, come on, Katie, you're a scientist, and this is not a comic book. There is no quick fix. Quick fix? Fuck you, this will take years to develop. We may already be too late. She wasn't wrong. Over the years, more and more lives would be affected by our human tendency to put fossil fuels and money ahead of the environment. The engine was simply based on the idea of taking our pollutants and removing them from our environment. I know that sounds odd, so let me explain it another way. Without coming out and saying it, Katie wanted to create a machine to literally teleport pollutants away from the Earth. Sounds crazy, right? Well, our higher-ups decided that sometimes crazy can work, and they gave us the go-ahead on the project. Anyone who has ever worked for a multinational company knows that when they give you a blank check, you take it. We also knew they would ask the tough questions down the road. Questions like, can this be weaponized? How much money can we make back on this? What are other applications for this machine? Typical bullshit. The machine incorporated 5 rings that would rotate around each other while being held together with metal rods. The base of the machine could be made in various sizes, from small enough to fit in a room for garbage removal, to being fitted over factories and smokestacks to help battle smog. Before we could go that big, however, we would have to prove that we could make this work on a much smaller scale. I'll never forget the look of glee on Katie's face when the first set of pieces arrived from the fabrication lab. She ran her fingers along the pieces and smiled at me. It was a smile that told me we were going to change the world forever. Carefully counting and setting aside each piece, Katie used her graphs and written calculations along with the computer to begin to assemble the small engine. At this point, it was I who had become the assistant, and she was in charge. Honestly, I had no problem with this. This was about the greater good, and to see the passion in her eyes was enough for me. Once assembled, I sat back with an apple to watch as Katie began the process of powering up the engine's rings. She backed away as they sparked and whirled, for a moment looking scared that something was wrong. The rings spun faster and faster until we couldn't even see them. What we could see was something like a small thunderstorm where the rings should be. A blue light whirled, and what can only be described as a spatial whirlpool opened before our eyes. Then, with a bit of a crazy look on her face, she grabbed my apple and tossed it at the machine. Her aim was true, and the apple was gone in an instant. We waited and watched. Silence filled the room. The only sound was that of the engine's whirl. Slowly, Katie walked around the table looking up and down for any sign of the apple. She looked at me with the excitement of a young woman who was just asked to marry the love of her life. She then quickly picked up a stapler and tossed it toward myself and the engine. I braced myself, but the stapler never made it to me. It had entered the whirlpool from the other side and was gone. Katie squealed with joy and ran to wrap her arms around me. "It works, Greg! It fucking works!" She hugged me tight and then kissed me right on the lips and smiled, going back to watch the engine. I sat there amused and proud. I was also unsure if she even realized she kissed me or if the excitement was just too much. With her hands folded in front of her, she jumped up and down with pure excitement. Katie spent hours writing down observations and taking notes. She played with the amperage to see what changes that might bring. Coworkers came to see the results, and the awe and amazed look on their faces absolutely filled Katie with confidence. We spent most of the night jotting down every detail we could and making sure to observe the experiment from all angles. I had set up several small cameras so we could go back and look at the footage of the experiment at any time. We made backups of our backups and then backed those up as well before eventually having to call it a night. We made sure to lock up the entire lab, and I made a call to confirm our need for extra security overnight. Katie had asked me to grab dinner, and I agreed, assuming we would continue to talk about the successes we'd had. We did just that until I took her home. I quickly realized that the kiss she gave me was more than just from excitement. As I parked outside her home, Katie pulled me close to her and began to kiss me all over before her hands moved elsewhere. We had a beautiful night together. My only regret was that neither of us had been brave enough to make a move until this experiment had come along. The following day, our lab was a fervor of chaos. Word of our research had reached the powers that be, and they were ahead of us, inside the lab and looking over the equipment. Katie lost her shit on those inside and began to yell at them about having no right to enter the lab without her. It was when she raised her hand and was stopped by a security agent that she calmed down. Mr. Reynolds, our supervisor, stepped forward. His suit was pressed, and he looked like a moment of his time was worth more than my yearly salary. He looked at Katie, and then to me. Let me explain something to both of you. Your equipment is my equipment. Your research is my research. Do you understand what I'm saying? You should be proud. You did your jobs. But now it's time for the business end of things to step in. It is not like we have stolen anything from you. Katie grew red with anger, but knew that Reynolds had her dead to rights. Reynolds knew this too. I personally felt that if we just played our cards right, things could work out well for all parties. I placed my hand on Katie's shoulder and gave her a knowing nod. She relented, and we watched as Reynolds' team did their jobs as they combed through our research. Katie and I went an entire week waiting to see what would happen when we got a call to meet with Mr. Reynolds in his office. The meeting seemed like it would be short and sweet, but we didn't realize that Reynolds had scheduled for us to meet with our company's top investor. His name was Ivan Treefolds. A tall, European gentleman, Ivan greeted us with a very warm smile and was not at all what I would have expected. He sat across from Katie and myself and then told us of all the wonderful things Reynolds had told him about our research. Katie and I were both simply astounded that we were not only shown appreciation, but given full credit for our work, bonuses included. We were told we would be moved to the offices in Washington and that our work was made priority one. Our fears of having our work scavenged were quickly replaced with the hope that our work would be helping mankind and was to be fully funded. For the next month, our life was amazing. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. A large-scale version of the pollution engine had been underway just outside of the capital. The theory was that we would use the engine to remove pollution and waste from our planet. With our research, we had determined that we could give direction as to where we would send the waste. Katie had spent countless hours calculating a way to send the waste and pollution to the farthest reaches of our known universe. Test run after test run seemed to have proved her calculations to be accurate. Katie and I, along with Mr. Treefolds and Mr. Reynolds, met with the President and the Joint Chiefs to discuss the first major expulsion of pollutants from our planet. We had invited them to our labs so they could get a better idea on how the process would work. The plan was to use large helicopters and drones to carry the waste and dump it into the pollution engine. There were safety measures in place to ensure none of the copters or pilots would be transported to their doom in the outer reaches of space. Pilots had to keep their helicopters at least 1,000 feet above the arc of the engine. April 22nd was announced to be the first day of pollution removal, as that was Earth Day. We were in the main control room along with several members of Congress, White House staffers, and delegates from other countries who had contributed to the effort to clean up our planet. The event was of course set to be televised across the globe. There were festivals planned across the planet to celebrate what we considered to be our global salvation. At 10 in the morning, Katie readied herself as the President gave her the order to initiate the pollution engine. She beamed as she stepped forward and placed her hand over the controls. A countdown from 10 was being broadcast. At about the 7-second mark, she looked back at me and smiled, then faced the cameras as the voiceover announced the 1 and then the 0. Katie flipped the switch. As the engine began to run, the helicopters and drones began to approach with the first load of waste to be sent away from our planet forever. As the drones dropped the waste into the engine, there was a bright flash and the waste was gone. You could almost hear the celebrations from all over the planet. The control room was filled with cheers and applause. We all clapped, hugged, and rejoiced together. And then over the speakers, we heard from one of the pilots. "Mission Control? Something's happening." We quickly looked at the monitors. As the engine swirled, the portal that it had created seemed to warp and shift. Soon, what can only be described as a flock of black creatures flew out and began to bombard the helicopters. Katie quickly went to reach for the controls, but they sparked and began to overload. Just before the monitors went out, we could see something gigantic emerging from the portal. As the creature roared, there was a wave of energy that took out power in the entire capital. It was chaos as we tried to get out of the command center. In the streets, all types of nightmare creatures were attacking and mauling citizens as they ran. Flying beasts would drop people from the air before starting to eat them. A herd of three-horned creatures ran the streets, trampling anyone in their way. Strange beasts of all kinds continued their swarm from the portal. Some were so big that I can't describe more than their legs. Buildings began to fall. Towers were destroyed. Wailing came from those we were trying to save. We were able to get to our lab and made our way to the lower level shelter. Before we lost power in the shelter, we were able to see coverage of the chaos for only a few hours before the news network was taken down. The worst thing I saw, not including the giant beast in the background destroying fighter planes, was the death of a news anchor. The fool had tried to go live from a rooftop. Moments before the cameraman was also taken out, a large, six-legged creature had climbed up to the roof and pulled the poor man apart before they were able to cut away. The man screamed in such a horrible way that I don't think it would be possible to forget it. His entrails seemed to tantalize the creature as it chewed on him. The creature then howled as it jumped toward the camera, and we were left hearing the shrieks as the camera fell and focused on the dead man's open chest. It felt like an eternity as we listened to the sounds of chewing and crunching. One of the creature's back paws could be seen shuffling as it pulled on its meal. Today is April 29th. The creatures have taken most of the planet, and we are sure they are terraforming it to meet all their needs. The air is becoming more and more harmful to breathe. Billions of people have been killed. We wanted to save the planet, and instead we guaranteed it would be destroyed. Last night, Katie put a bullet in her mouth. I don't know what I should do now. If I open the door, something might get in, but if I just stay put, I know she'll just be staring at me every time I open my eyes. I wish she had saved a bullet for me. I can hear something rooting around out there. It sounds like some sort of demon. From what I saw, these things kill quickly. Maybe I should just open the door.